Start. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane. I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts, and I am excited to have our October session with Jeff DePaoli of that haunted, that
That
Halloween
Halloween
podcast.
podcast.
You can tell it's been a long day, but he's been doing these all year and they're fabulous. Before we get started, I just want to say a quick thank you to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library and to Jeff and Brett for letting us share this program with other libraries because when libraries work together, we just make magic, like witch magic, but cooler because we're librarians. So he's going to be talking tonight with Brett Bertolino of the 13th Floor Entertainment, but really, they're going to hone in on the Queen Mary's Dark Harbor, The Spirits Rise, which is, I'm just learning about it. I'm super excited, although I'm a chicken and I might not ever make it to it, but I'm super excited to hear all about it. Welcome, Brett. Welcome, Jeff. I'm so happy to be here in October with you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. One thing to keep in mind, feel free to use the chat during our conversation to chat with each other, make comments, whatever you'd like. But there is a Q&A tab next to the chat. If you have any questions for Brett, feel free to use that Q&A chat. We'll get to it at the end of the conversation today. But with that, hello, Brett Bertolino. How's it going?
Great, Jeff. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's spooky season. It's my favorite time of year. It's officially October, so I'm happy. And we should say your title is the Director of Special Projects at 13th Floor Entertainment Group. Before we jump into Queen Mary, can you just touch very brief history on 13th Floor because there's a lot going on with 13th Floor all over the country.
Sure. Well, today, 13th Floor Entertainment Group is the world's largest provider of live Halloween entertainment. So we have properties from coast to coast. We have lots of things like haunted houses. We're going to talk about the Queen Mary's Dark Harbor today, but we also have seasonal events that are at our Halloween events that are tied to Christmas, Valentine's Day, and things like that, as well as axe throwing, escape rooms. In Philadelphia, we have an immersive artist installation, large scale installation called Otherworld Philadelphia. So we focus on location based live entertainment. 13th Floor Entertainment Group was started by Chris Stafford and Warren Kennard out in Denver, and they partnered with some other folks from Austin, and continue to acquire haunted houses, continue to produce new haunted house events, and other Halloween events. So we focus on large scale live location based entertainment, typically in the Halloween realm, but not only in the Halloween realm.
And I am very spoiled here in Southern California because 13th Floor Entertainment Group has four haunt events here, or Halloween events here, which I love so much. So thank you so much for joining today. Can you just tell me a little bit about your title, Director of Special Projects? What does that
Sure.
mean? That sounds like they can throw you wherever they want to. That's what that sounds like.
Well, that pretty much is what the title is about. But I have a long career in location-based entertainment and haunted houses and operations. And when I joined 13th Floor, part of the allure for me was that 13th Floor has so many properties, and 13th Floor is growing and bringing on new projects. And so there's a lot of opportunity with this company. But in my role as director of special projects, I typically work on either our new projects or projects that need special attention, kind of moving from project to project to add some oversight, my expertise, looking at making sure that these projects are brought in on time, on budget, and to the quality that 13th Floor is known for. So I'm not really tied to one particular project in perpetuity. This year, my special project, and it really is a special one, is the Queen Mary's Dark Harbor. I've worked on a few other projects for the company this year and helped out. And then last year I did Shacktoberfest, which is a little ironic that I'm doing two different projects back to back that happen to be at the same property, but they're very different projects, very different audiences that are attending them.
Absolutely. There's a shot of Shacktoberfest, which took place at the Queen Mary as well. And just for folks who don't know, Brett, can you touch on what the Queen Mary is and where it's located?
Sure. The Queen Mary is a historic ocean liner that's docked permanently in Long Beach, California. I'm not an expert on the history of the Queen Mary, but it was used as a troop transport vessel during World War One. It was called the Gray Ghost. They painted the entire thing gray, and it served as a troop transport vessel. I think it may still hold the record for a ship that has held the most number of people on it at one time. It was really packed with soldiers. We, reference that period in the ship's history a little bit at the Halloween events we produce at the Queen Mary. But it was, a first class ocean liner. People like Walt Disney sailed on this. This was, back in the day when, crossing the ocean really was by boat or by ship, I should say. They don't like to call the Queen. It's not a boat, it's a ship, as opposed to an airplane. But Queen Mary is a very famous vessel. It's more than twice the size of the Titanic. It sits right off the shore of Long Beach, and it's been docked in Long Beach longer than it ever set sailed, or that it ever carried passengers. So really, a lot of the Queen's history now is in Long Beach, which is really cool.
And it is really a haunted ship. And anybody, if you come visit Southern California, it's a museum essentially. It's basically these days year round, it's a museum with tours and a hotel. So you can go visit the Queen Mary whenever you'd like. But for the Halloween season, it's had a tradition of having big Halloween events there. And Dark Harbor has a history long before 13th Floor Entertainment Group ever became part of it. But 13th Floor Entertainment Group started producing stuff at the Queen Mary, I believe it was 2022, correct? Was the first year of Shacktoberfest?
Yep.
And that's what we're looking at right here. This is a giant inflatable shack. And when I say giant, I mean you walked through his body to get into the event. It is massive. And they did that for 2022 and 2023. And this is the first year that 13th Floor Entertainment Group is producing Queen Mary's Dark Harbor. Let's take a quick peek. Nice. So how do you go from Shacktoberfest to the Queen Mary's Dark Harbor? How did that happen? Was that something 13th Floor wanted to do? Was that something Long Beach requested?
Well, I think, the short answer is I think yes. I think everybody wanted Dark Harbor back. As somebody that's worked in the Long Beach market the last several years and was a producer of Shacktoberfest, I mean, Dark Harbor is something that Long Beach is really passionate about, Southern California is passionate about. I think the haunt industry is passionate about Dark Harbor. Dark Harbor really is a special event. Um, Dark Harbor operated for 10 years from 2010 to 2019. It built a huge following. It, became a Halloween tradition in this region, and people traveled from across the country to see Dark Harbor. When I was running events in Philadelphia, I came out 3 times in that 10 years just to see Dark Harbor. Once I saw it when it was not operation, on an off night, and the other 2 times it was in operation. Um, but I think that gives you a sense of how much allure this event has had for someone who works in haunts to travel in season across the country to see it. Dark Harbor has always been special. I'm sure we'll talk about some of the reasons why, but there was never any intention for Dark Harbor to end. Like a lot of things, it was, chugging along and there were plans for the future. And then the pandemic came in 2020, and Dark Harbor was suspended for just one season. Ultimately, none of us knew what the pandemic held for us. And the Queen Mary itself was closed for 3 years during that time. I mean, completely closed. No hotel, no restaurant, no events. During that time, a lot of change happened at the Queen. The city of Long Beach owns the property, the Queen Mary, and they actually own Dark Harbor. So as the pandemic was kind of waning and things were starting to get back to normal, there was a huge hole in this market for a Halloween event. And so we were looking for a place to have a new event called Shacktoberfest in Southern California. the city of Long Beach was looking for to do something at the Queen Mary property while the ship was closed. And so we had a great relationship to operate Shacktoberfest at the Queen Mary property in 2022 and 2023. But I think that the plan was always from the city's perspective to bring back Dark Harbor. You've been to it, Jeff. Dark Harbor is a massive, massive event. Um, and most of the assets from the previous version of Dark Harbor were lost during the pandemic. There's, very few physical assets left. And so it wasn't really, I think, for the city's perspective of if Dark Harbor's coming back, it was more of a when. And I think that the pandemic stretched on much longer than people could have imagined. And I think after kind of 4 seasons, a lot of people were starting to think that Dark Harbor was not coming back. And even in the months leading up to the announcement of Dark Harbor's return, we were talking to lots of fans and lots of people in the industry that had kind of finally resolved themselves to like, okay, that ship has sailed. We don't think, Dark Harbor's ever coming back. We were at Shack last year. It was really great. We're excited for Shack this year. So I do feel like, Dark Harbor has those passionate fans. We'll talk about why I think that is. I'm sure you have your own thoughts, but it was really that pandemic that put a giant unscheduled pause in this massive, beloved regional event. And so when the city was finally ready to bring back Dark Harbor, we wanted to throw our names in the hat. I know for Chris, our president, he was really passionate about the project. But just like I said earlier, I'm a fan of Dark Harbor. So for me, it was also something that, I wanted to work on as a special project. So we're all really excited that Dark Harbor returns this season.
Yeah, and I think, I'm ashamed at myself for not having seen this coming. I got to be honest, because, I went to Shacktoberfest both years, and I should have gotten a hint during that second year when you all started putting mazes on the ship. And that's one of the cool things about Queen Mary's Dark Harbor is three of their five mazes take place on the ship. I mean, you're in a haunted ship going through haunted houses. It's a very unique location. And it seems like you were testing the waters year two of Shacktoberfest. Is that fair to say, or was that not even part of the conversation yet?
I mean, I think when we're producing events, Shacktoberfest had different stakeholders. It had, a different set of goals of what we were trying to accomplish there. And I am really proud of the product that we offered at Shacktoberfest. I think that we're always prototyping things for the future. The reason we added a maze on the ship was that the ship was now reopened. The first year of Shacktoberfest, the Queen Mary was completely closed. I wasn't working on the project at that time, but people told me that it was such an eerie feeling to have this massive ship, like I said, twice the size of the Titanic, literally on the side of your event. And at Dark Harbor, when you experience it, that ship is an asset. It's activated, it's lit up. We have three mazes on it. We have other attractions on it. That first year of Shacktoberfest, the ship was completely dormant. We weren't, and no one was allowed to go on it. So the idea of adding a maze on the ship the second year was just, we had that opportunity. Now the Queen Mary had only opened a few months before the second season of Shack, that we wanted to have a maze on the ship. You kind of said it. One of the things that makes Dark Harbor special is the fact that a large part of that event takes place on the Queen Mary. We have three massive mazes on the ship. We have a interactive sit-down theatrical seance that takes place on the ship. We have the ship's visitor center open at night, and then we have an area called Spirits of Dark Harbor, which is both a bar, but it also is an area where visitors can learn about how the real paranormal stories of the Queen Mary have influenced the stories and the characters of Dark Harbor. So, the ship really plays a central role in this Halloween event that we, are creating and that so many people love.
And, this was a bit unique because Dark Harbor was something that existed prior to 13th Floor, as we discussed. And I guess 13th Floor's had that experience in the past, but what's it like doing something like that versus building something brand new? I mean, like you said, this had a legacy. I think the public had expectations. I'm going to be completely honest here, folks. I've gone to Dark Harbor for a number of years. I was blown away by this year's Dark Harbor. By the second I walked in, I was like, holy crap, like this is, and the other thought in my mind is just like, okay, they did test runs with Shacktoberfest. Obviously, this is more scary than family friendly, but the footprint will be similar, or, they'll take learnings from that. This is a totally different event, and it's very impressive what was done. It's my personal favorite year of Dark Harbor that I've experienced. And the other thing that we'll get into is like it was a full night of stuff to do. Like there's a
Hmm.
ton to do there. So when you have those expectations from the public, and I was at the event where this was announced that it was returning, and there was a whole media event just to announce that Dark Harbor was coming back. How do you handle that sort of pressure, and or what are the benefits and I guess the pros and cons of having a brand that's already existed?
It's a great question, Jeff, and I will do my best to answer it. It's a really complex answer. I think that, um, Dark Harbor had a very, very strong brand. I mean, you see, the logo behind me. I feel like this logo is well known in the haunt industry. People know it. The brand of Dark Harbor, the characters of Dark Harbor, the stories of Dark Harbor are very well known, both to the audience and in the haunt industry. So, in one word, I would say it was a challenge to bring this event back. It was a huge challenge. And I think the fact that it existed in the past, the fact that we had access to this large catalog of IP that resonated with the audience, those were huge benefits. But then there were a lot of challenges, some of them meaning it hasn't operated for 4 years. Most of the physical assets from the last event don't exist anymore. So even if we wanted to say, let's bring back Dark Harbor 2019, just set it up the way it was and let's run it and see how it goes, that wasn't an option. A lot has changed on the ship side. The ship as a different management company. Some of the spaces that were used for Dark Harbor in 2019 are now used for other year-round activities on the site or on the ship and are not accessible to us. Um, so that was challenging. I think, we talked a little bit about Shacktoberfest. Shacktoberfest was also a challenge to us because we did spend 2 years on this property. We did spend a lot of time figuring out what worked, what didn't work, how to really leverage the property for the best benefit of the visitor, but at the same time, we knew that there were going to be people that might think, is this Shacktoberfest 2.0? Like, is this just, a bait and switch? And so we really wanted to make sure that this event felt like Dark Harbor and that it felt unique. And so even there were things that worked really well at Shacktoberfest last year that we didn't want to bring back, and there were things that worked in certain places on the property that we didn't want to bring back. I mean, I think that the amount of thought that our team put into Dark Harbor 2024 is really impressive to me, meaning that we really were focusing on every little detail. But at the end of the day, what really drove us was we were fans of Dark Harbor. And, it's our first crack at producing this event. It's a legacy event, it's a beloved event. I think that this is, a big moment for our company. It's like a big moment for me personally to have an opportunity to have a hand in bringing back something that so many people care and are so passionately about. But we came at everything from the fan perspective. We didn't come at it from a perspective of, a previous operator did this, so we don't want to do it, or a previous operator did this and we did want to do it. We really kind of, as the project director of this, I set out kind of as um, a commitment first that we were going to honor the history, the legacy, and the stories of Dark Harbor. And I really meant that. And I think that if you go to the event, you can feel that and you can see that. Um, and then the second thing that I worked with our team on was that we weren't going to change things just for the sake of changing. And so it wasn't like, okay, well, now this is our hand at running this event. Let's make it ours. It was more, this event worked in the past. It was really successful in the past. We can change anything, but if we change something, it has to make the event better for the visitors. it has to make the event better for the staff, or it has to make the event more profitable. At the end of the day, this is a big fundraiser for the Queen Mary. And so those were kind of our guiding principles as we, embarked on this giant endeavor, kind of almost with a clean piece of paper to bring back Dark Harbor. There was only one thing that we knew we were going to bring back, and that was the feast maze. And that was because the feast maze is the only thing from Dark Harbor 2019 that exists still. Everything else was removed from the ship when it was closed because nobody was on board of the ship. The fire department didn't want haunts. They really cleaned out a lot of things out of the ship because they weren't sure what was going to happen to it, and they wanted to make sure without any kind of monitoring that there weren't any fire hazards on the ship. But nobody really even knew that the feast maze was still on board. We were actually at Shack last year, and I was working, and Dylan, who leads the events for the ship, he leads that department. He radioed me and said, "Do you have a few minutes?" And I, usually like people ask you for a few minutes, you're like, "Okay, well, what's going wrong that we need to adjust right now?" And he's like, "I found something. I want you to show it, or do you want to see it?" And the feast maze is tucked at the very, very, very back of the ship. When you go through Feast, you see all the portholes. It's really cool. And you get to look at the event. You get to look at Long Beach, but it's tucked back behind, the real kitchen storage area. And it kind of had been forgotten over those 4 years with a lot of different folks, different management company, where people didn't even realize that that maze kind of had been forgotten. Didn't have any animatronics in it, a lot of lighting and sound, all those things were pulled out, but that physical set was there. And so we knew that we wanted to include that. And then we really, as thinking about what else we wanted to include, it was really talking to people. The city and the ship are our stakeholders, but we are Dark Harbor fans. There's a lot of people working on this project that are Dark Harbor fans. And then it was, talking to other people that are fans of Dark Harbor. What made this event special to you? What stood out to you? What was your favorite thing? And you get, common themes, but you get different answers from different people. Some people really like the entertainment. Some people really like the mazes on the ship. There are some people that really like the food and beverage. Like, it runs the whole gamut. And so we really wanted to make sure that when you went to Dark Harbor, it felt like Dark Harbor. We weren't trying to recreate any given year of Dark Harbor. Um, and I would go a step further and say, like, we weren't trying to recreate any given night at Dark Harbor. One of the reasons why I really like working in live entertainment is, the event is alive. It feels different every single night. A lot of nights feel similar, but there are things that change and you can tweak the event. There's the different energy from the monsters. And so we were really trying to, bring back that energy, that excitement, that feeling you get when you're on the ship, that feeling you get when you're in the harbor or the streets at Dark Harbor. That was what we were going for. And I think that we brought back enough of the big signature elements that make this event Dark Harbor, but we always left the door open to say, Dark Harbor would have continued to evolve if there had not been a pandemic. If we went to Dark Harbor 2020, 21, 22, 23, and now to 24, it wouldn't look exactly like it did in 2019. Things would have evolved, things would have changed. And so we always left the door open that we want to mix or marry with these classic things that are beloved, some new things, some cutting edge things. To take the best of the old and some of the new things and marry them together to create a modern Halloween festival that you'd expect to attend in 2024. And I think that really is honoring the history and the tradition of Dark Harbor, because Dark Harbor was always cutting edge, was always trying new things. And I remember, coming and visiting, whether it was secret bars or they're doing a ball pit in their maze, like whatever it was, they were doing things that were cutting edge, maybe things that you didn't see other places. And that is something that we continue to think about as we, look at the future of Dark Harbor.
Let's take a peek inside the ship here. I don't have any audio with this video, so we can talk over it. But I mean, there's the ship, right? I mean, a lot of people who look at it first glance like, oh, it's the Titanic. Well, it's White Star Line, but it's not the Titanic. And the mazes, or a few of the mazes, are inside the ship, which is where we are right now. Obviously, once again, some pros and cons when it comes to building a haunted maze inside of a haunted ship. So let's start with the pros. I mean, the atmosphere for one, right?
I mean, I think the atmosphere, of course. I think it's also the anticipation. I mean, I think we've strategically this year placed all the cues for the ship mazes and places where you're kind of in the harbor and you're looking up at this big, massive ship. And there is this anticipation and when you walk over the gangway onto a massive ship that, a lot of people really believe it's haunted. And so you have kind of the ship itself, you have the paranormal stories about the Queen Mary,
Those are
and
the
then you just
portholes. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt for a quick second. I'll go back there. But take it. So this is the like you're on the ship. That's a porthole looking out either onto the ocean or the event there. I mean, you're
and
on the
even
ship.
and even in Feast, we made some changes this year to certain rooms in Feast. And one of the things we did was open up some more portholes on the city side of the ship because it's something that you can't recreate these sets, or you could, but you know, they just wouldn't be at the scale that they are on the Queen Mary. And so we really want to take advantage of that authenticity that exists on the ship. All of these mazes on the ship kind of exist in a time period, in the 1940s or 50s, where it's more tied to the ship history, the paranormal stories that happen on the ship. And then in the harbor, we feel like we have a little bit more freedom to do some things that are a little bit less tied to the ship or a little bit that are, more fun. I think this is a giant event. And so we have some things that are designed to be terrifying, and we have some things that are designed to be a little bit more entertaining, and some that fall right in the middle of that.
What are some of the difficult things about, like some of the things we might not think about as far as building on a ship? I would assume getting stuff to like, there's no hidden passageways or anything, I think, right? Like in order to get fog machines and lighting and all that stuff, you
The
gotta walk.
challenges, there's lots of challenges, Jeff. I mean, getting into and getting onto and off the ship is a big challenge, both for visitors and then, set pieces, animatronics, like getting a lot of those things onto the ship, into these narrow spaces is a challenge. Um, Space in and of itself is a challenge. The Queen Mary is a massive ship, but it's a ship that's on the rise. Since it's reopened in April 2023, there's been a lot of growth on the ship. They're bringing back new programs and new tours and new exhibits. And so, space is at a premium. Like I mentioned, some of the spaces that were previously used for this event in the past weren't available to us. So, um, those are some of the challenges. Electric in areas is a challenge. Wi-Fi on the ship is a challenge. Trying to have three big mazes on the ship is a challenge. Those mazes are weaved all throughout the ship. Infirmary takes place on three different decks of the ship. All these mazes um, have steps to get to them or get from them. We do have one maze on the ship that's accessible, but these mazes are really tucked in areas of the ship that were never intended to be open to the public. And so they're really cool to visually see, but they're cool to get to. As a visitor, you have no idea where you are on the ship, and it's interesting because the mazes are big, and so you might go by some portholes and you see the city of Long Beach. Later on in that maze, you go by some other portholes and you see the event, and like you're going from side to side, deck to deck. So there are lots and lots of challenges, but I think we know that the benefits outweigh it. And we talked about that. That ship is so impressive, and it really sets the stage for what you're going to experience when you step inside.
Yeah, now do the ship owners kind of dictate, hey, this is what you have access to, or do you have a chance to kind of poke around and be like, oh, this would be a cool spot for a maze?
We work really closely with the city and the ship, and we all want this event to be successful, and so we're not allowed to really use any spaces that are open to the public unless we use them and kind of the way that they are. But the city and the ship were very amenable to us coming in. We spent lots and lots of time both. When we were operating Shacktoberfest, and then when Shacktoberfest ended, exploring the ship with the ship's staff, with the ship's engineer, with the ship's commodore, really exploring both the physical spaces on the ship and then, the stories of the ship. And if we could make a case that a space was, usable for the event and can show why it would make sense to use that space, show that it would be something that could generate revenue, um, the ship and the city were very amenable. There were some spaces that we had ideas for that we weren't able to get access to this year, but I think that anytime you're building an event like this, I always feel like you have more ideas than you have time and budget. And so, we're not only thinking of Dark Harbor 2024, we're thinking of the future of Dark Harbor. And so, if you come back to the event this year, you'll see us. We're open 30 nights, and so the event's up and running. It's chugging along, and so our teams are now confident in their roles. This is the point in the season where we do start doing some prototyping for the following season, trying some things out that we might want to do in the future to see how they work with a live audience.
Very cool. Now, one of the hidden little secrets of Queen Mary's Dark Harbor are you have some hidden speakeasies throughout the event, some of which are on the ship. This was my reaction to the speakeasy. So here we go.
It looks like you're in Fathom
I'm in the
6.
bowels of the Queen Mary at Queen Mary's Dark Harbor, and this is wild. You can hear people above being scared, but we just found a secret speakeasy, and like you're basically let loose in the basement of the ship. This is kind of wild and unexpected, and I'm kind of loving it. This is pretty cool.
Honestly loved it. I was not expecting that. And I mean, look at this photo. This was taken on my iPhone. This is no, special camera or anything. This is what it looks like. And you're just let down there, grab a drink, wander around, and it's such a cool space. I loved it so much. So where did this whole hidden speakeasy thing was kind of a remnant of the past of the event,
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we made a list of all the things that we felt were core Dark Harbor experiences that fans, continually came up as we talked to fans that these were things that made Dark Harbor Dark Harbor. In the past, they were called secret bars. We call them speakeasies. But there's something that, I think that Dark Harbor, um, was on the cutting edge when they introduced these secret bars in the past. It's, something that Halloween events around the country are trying. We had one secret bar at Shacktoberfest last year, but we wanted to continue that program, but we felt like it could be improved. And so we call them speakeasies. We've tied all of them together kind of with a common narrative around a character called Lady Mabel. We talked a little bit at the beginning of this about, the Queen Mary's history. Well, when the Queen Mary was launched, there was a psychic at the launch, and the psychic said that she predicted that the Queen Mary would be more famous when she stopped sailing than when she is carrying fare paying passengers. And we really loved that quote. We felt like it was really appropriate for the time of bringing back Dark Harbor. And we kind of used that character and kind of the mystic qualities of her to inspire this year's speakeasies. And so you can meet Lady Mabel at the event. The speakeasies are truly speakeasies. So we decided that we didn't want to put their location on a map. We don't have a sign for them. They don't have names typically. We really wanted it to be more like a real speakeasy where visitors come across them, and feel like they're finding something special. And so when you go to Dark Harbor, Lady Mabel will give you some clues about how you find the speakeasies, but she won't tell you how many there are. She won't tell you their location. Um, and they do change throughout the season. So we have a bunch of speakeasies open right now. But there are others that we will bring online, some that we will take offline. And so the idea is that this event is big. I think, Jeff, you said there's a ton of stuff to do there for one night. We do feel like in the past and this year it continues that the fans of Dark Harbor don't just typically come for one night. They come for multiple nights. There's so much to do, so much to see, so much to eat and drink that we want you to save your speakeasy tokens and come back. And when you come back, maybe there's a speakeasy in a place there wasn't in the past, or maybe there's something else that's changed at the event. So the speakeasies are really cool. They give you an opportunity to um, sometimes further the story, sometimes see more of the ship, sometimes just take a break in the maze and get a different experience. Some of them give you a different view into the maze or an opportunity to be kind of a participant in the maze. Um, and they're really cool. They're not, I would say, 100% unique to Dark Harbor, but what we have done this year for our speakeasies is made sure that they're open to visitors of all ages and make sure that they all have a mocktail. And so I do think that that's something that's important. I don't know in the past if speakeasies were open to people that are under 21, but as we created this year's event, it was really important to us to not create areas that were restricted by age. We felt like we could create a giant Halloween festival that did include alcoholic beverage offerings, did include speakeasies, but had other things, other entertainment, mocktails, and other things that it could be a broad, wide audience. You didn't have to leave one person in your group outside because they didn't drink or because they were under 21. So I think the speakeasies work really well. And my experience has been it's a great time when it's in the middle of the maze, everybody you're with wants to stop and talk about what they liked and what scared them. And you showed that video down in Fathom 6. You get to see one of the signature scares in Lullaby from below. And you heard the screams, you saw the visuals. People stand there all night just enjoying that scene. So it's really a cool way to see the mazes from a different perspective.
Yeah, my favorite part was listening to the other people freak out. And what was interesting was I kind of had the assumption when I was down there, oh, that moment is going to be coming later when I continue the maze because the speakeasy was right in the middle of the maze. And then when you're done down there, you finish the maze. And I was like, oh, so eventually I'm going to get to that point, but it's actually not in that maze. It's in a different maze. So you get a nice little surprise for later, or maybe you already did it earlier in the night. But it is a lot of fun, and I loved it. Now, let's talk about some of the mazes and the kind of. I know a lot of the characters are based on some real history on the Queen Mary. So, who's that right there? Is that Scary Mary on the left?
That is Scary Mary. I'm glad you had to clarify there, but that is Scary Mary on the left.
And what's a bit of her like real mythology?
So Scary Mary is a character that's based on the story of a real child passenger, a girl that allegedly drowned in the first class swimming pool. Believe her name might have been Jackie. And so some of the characters and some of the stories of Dark Harbor are based on those real paranormal experiences. And I will tell you, I'm not a big believer in ghosts, but people believe the Queen Mary is haunted. Even last night, when I talked to one of our staff members who's working in on the ship in one of the speakeasies, she told me the ghosts are really out tonight. Like the staff can feel it when the energy is different, whether it's real paranormal activity or their minds getting the best of them. But people really do feel that energy when they go on board, and so Dark Harbor has been really successful at taking some of those stories, those paranormal stories that occur on the ship of this, small female child ghost that is playful and is around the first class swimming pool and build a whole narrative around it. So You'll see Scary Mary at the event. There are dozens and dozens of performers that play Scary Mary every single night. We have her in the harbor. There's dozens of her in her maze. So she has a maze called Lullaby. Lullaby was a maze that existed in Dark Harbor in the past, and it was something that we wanted to bring back because we felt like this character really resonates with the audience. And the story really resonates. I think that's what also makes Dark Harbor different from other regional haunted houses that are not part of a theme park chain is Dark Harbor has its own IP, and that IP is really known by the fans. So the fans know Scary Mary. They know her story. And so we wanted to bring back Lullaby. Um, it's, an all new path, it's all new sets. It's largely the story of Lullaby in the past, but we've tried to always continue the stories, add to them, have those stories evolve just like they did in the past. And so this year in Lullaby, you meet some of Scary Mary's relatives. You'll meet her father in the maze. Some of the folks that are searching for her when she's missing. So she's one of a few characters. And when you're in Spirits of Dark Harbor, you can read the ghost stories and kind of understand how they have influenced these characters. And people really like that connection to the Queen.
Now, we mentioned a little earlier how the public was looking forward to the return of Dark Harbor, but correct me if I'm wrong, I believe, especially in the case of the Ringmaster, there were definitely performers that very much were looking forward to returning to Dark Harbor as well. Is that correct?
Sure. I mean, I think that, Dark Harbor was, had such a draw and people were so passionate about it, both fans and performers. It's been really nice to have an opportunity to relaunch Dark Harbor because I do feel like some people in the haunt industry, I think, felt like they lost their home, they lost their place that they like to haunt. When we were operating Shacktoberfest, we had a lot of people that worked previously at Dark Harbor that worked for us. But some of those folks went to other events in the area, and so this year it's interesting. Our cast includes people that worked at Dark Harbor in the past, people that worked at Shacktoberfest in the past, people from Knott's and Universal and Six Flags. There's even some people on our cast that have worked at Shipwreck, which is the event that preceded Dark Harbor the first time. Then they worked at the first iteration of Dark Harbor. Then they worked at Shack, and now they're back at Dark Harbor. And so the Queen Mary really does have this history of being the place where people in Long Beach go to celebrate Halloween. It's been going on for, decades now. And I think that that was one of the reasons why it was so important for us to bring this back in a way that resonated with the fans, that felt like they were coming back to an event that they really loved and were passionate about.
And, there's so much to do, as I mentioned. I know you have this character of the Ringmaster, which kind of lends itself to a circus-like atmosphere. And as you can see, we have carnival rides here, we have food here, there are games around. And can you talk just a little bit about really making it a destination? Because I think, for people not close to Long Beach, it's always that challenge of, do I want to fight the traffic? I want to make sure what I'm paying is worth my while. Am I going to get, like, I feel it's difficult for a standalone haunt to say, hey, I'm going to drive, deal with parking, pay to get in, and I'm done once I'm through this 15-minute haunt or whatever it is. Whereas in the case of Queen Mary's Dark Harbor, like, this is a destination. There was so much to do. Like, I didn't get it all done in one night, and I even had like priority passes to cut lines and stuff. So there was so much going on. Can you talk a bit about like building that world and actually making it all make sense within the story of Dark Harbor?
I think you're right. I think that, Dark Harbor was ahead of the curve before the pandemic, meaning creating this Halloween world, this Halloween festival. When folks are coming out now for an evening, they want it to be their whole evening. And so, if they're going to a standalone haunted house, they're still eating somewhere, they're still drinking somewhere, they're still doing these other activities. The difference is if it's a standalone haunt, you're not getting any of that revenue and it's not extending their experience, it's not adding to the story. So with Dark Harbor, it really is a destination. People sometimes go to the event and are unsure of how to classify it. Because if you think you're going to a haunted house, it's so much more than a haunted house. I mean, the event is absolutely massive. It has, 5 haunted houses, which are all really big and can stand, on their own. But then you have the 4 carnival rides. We have a sit-down seance. We have all the speakeasies. We have robust food and beverage program. And again, try to make that food and beverage program unique with items that are either unique to Dark Harbor or tied to the theme, tied to the stories. Our food vendor grills all these, if you're into meat, like all these meats right out, on these big open grills, giant
Smells
meat on
so
the
good.
stick, the turkey legs. I mean, a lot of people, would say Dark Harbor is like a theme park or a mini theme park. I classify it as a large scale Halloween event. And then you have all the entertainment at Dark Harbor. And I think that's another thing that makes Dark Harbor stand out from other Halloween events is the scale and diversity of entertainment. So we have a slider show, we have a stage where we do for fire performances and aerial performances. Something that we've introduced to the festival this year is an area called Shipyard, where we do 2 big parties every night. We do a launch party, a maiden voyage launch party, where all the icon characters are introduced to the crowd. And again, a way that even if you knew nothing about Dark Harbor, it was your first time going there, we really wanted to figure out ways that we could immerse you in the story, get you to start understanding the story and the characters. And then at the end of the night, we do a big final voyage party. And so the maiden voyage and the final voyage, some of the inspiration for those was really trying to tie as much of the Queen Mary and the Queen Mary's history to Dark Harbor. So we're really trying to inject that as much as we can into the event.
Very nice. I'm gonna start answering some Q&As. We are running low on time here. Folks, if you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the Q&A tab. Let's see what we have here. Queen Mary is known to be a very haunted location. Have any paranormal events affected the Dark Harbor event? You ever have to shut down because of a ghost?
We haven't had to shut down because of a ghost. We've had to shut down because of fire alarms, certain mazes and things. But here's what I'd say. I haven't seen anything specifically that, I would say is paranormal or ghost, but things on the ship sometimes move around. Things on the ship, sometimes settings on devices get changed where, people are convinced like it couldn't be an actor, it couldn't be a tech person, it couldn't be an engineer. Like it's just that kind of strange that something must have happened that is more of on the paranormal side. But the ship is scary during the day. It's really scary when we add fog, lighting, sound, and all these monsters.
Very cool. What is the space where the maze is? What's the space used for where the maze is for when it's not being used for Dark Harbor?
So all the mazes are pretty much in areas that are not used for the public. So the Queen Mary is a massive ship. There are sometimes decks in between decks. So a lot of the spaces that we're using are for engineering. It's where a lot of the infrastructure of the ship runs. But the ship also does different tours through these spaces, both paranormal tours and history tours. So you get to see some of the parts of the ship, like I said, that were never intended to be seen by the public. They weren't those spaces where those fare-paying passengers would go. They would go to the first class swimming pool, the first class dining room. They're not going to go down and look at the boiler room or the engine room or those kind of spaces that, are really cool. So they're in those kind of really industrial spaces, a lot of them.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the feast maze was kind of found years later. So that means nobody had really been down there, right? For feast, it was just kind of sitting there and waiting to be discovered.
It was literally like stepping back in time. Cobwebs all over, and even like in the break space for that maze on the whiteboard, it said like, "Thanks for a great season, feast crew." Like it was just really cool to kind of step back. And, this was Dark Harbor. Like I said, that we're all fans as well. So there were a lot of these kind of emotional moments or moments where you got chills of, this event is coming back. It's rising.
Very cool. You said it's also a hotel. If so, are hotel guests seeing or hearing this when they're headed to their rooms or enjoying the rest of the ship? Oh, yeah, I can tell you they're definitely hearing it. But talk a little bit more on that. Are there regular guests, do you think, that show up and don't even know that there's this giant Halloween event that takes place? Or do you know if the hotel kind of warns guests that, hey,
Well,
for a month this
they
happens?
certainly warn guests. So if you haven't been
Okay.
to Dark Harbor, it takes place both on the ship, but then the surrounding harbor, we take over most of it. This is the biggest footprint that Dark Harbor's ever had. We do sell hotel packages that include VIP admission to Dark Harbor. The biggest issue, being on the ship is really cool because you can look down over all the aspects of the event that are in the harbor. The biggest challenge we have is noise. And so we make sure that really, as soon as the event ends, we really power down the sound pretty quickly. And so that is really the only complaint that the ship gets about the event from people staying on board if they don't know. But I was just talking with some folks from the ship, and they told me that outside of the hotel packages, they think that mostly everybody else that's booking rooms on Dark Harbor nights are here for the event. And so, you kind of asked early, like, what's the best way to see Dark Harbor? Stay on the ship. I mean, then you don't have to worry about traffic or parking, and you really get to be there right in the heart of the action. Get there when we open, and stay till when we close.
Talk about a destination. That's a destination experience right there. How do you design for a ship? What are some of the challenges with being on a ship versus other more conventional venues?
So a lot of the challenges with design on the ship are we don't have the benefit of space. And so, when you go through the mazes at Dark Harbor on the ship, um, we like to play with the space, but a lot of those spaces are narrow, which that claustrophobic feeling adds to a lot of the scare factor for folks. But I think the biggest challenge is like there's the challenge of electrical, there's a challenge of infrastructure, but without the wide spaces, you can't build scenes and sets where actors can a lot of times scare a group multiple times or scare multiple groups. So that is one of the challenges of working on the ship. But like I said earlier, the aesthetics of the ship, that kind of fear factor of being on the ship really does outweigh those challenges. In our lullaby maze in particular, that maze is laid out almost in a pattern of seeing a scene and then going into the darkness, seeing a scene and going into the darkness, because that physical area where we're at has a lot of like dark, narrow, claustrophobic spaces. And just those spaces in and of themselves are scary. You don't have to do much to them because everything else that you've seen before it and that environment really makes people on edge.
Bro, what do you hope we get with the future of Queen Mary's Dark Harbor? It sounds like 13th floor is going to come back and do it again next year. I believe, well, I don't know if I can say that, so I'm not going to say that. But what do we think the future might hold for Queen Mary's Dark Harbor? Or if you just had it all your way, let's throw budget out the window and all that fun stuff. What would be like your dream scenario for the future of Queen Mary's Dark Harbor?
So it's such a hard question. I guess, dream scenario is we want this event to continue to grow. And I think that, some things that I'm interested in seeing is more activations on the ship. Like I told you, there's a lot of cool spaces on the ship that are even not used for daytime that are close to the event footprint. So, we've been thinking about ways to use more of the ship, how to get folks to more spaces on the ship. I think we're always interested in increasing the scare factor. Um, also looking at some of the things that are just more of a spectacle for visitors. I think that um, a lot's going to change on the Queen Mary property moving forward, is what I would say. This is a very busy property that there's a lot of events and activations. And so I think Dark Harbor will continue to evolve. But my hope for Dark Harbor is it stays a cutting edge Halloween festival that is trying new things. And I think that if you went to the event this year, you'll see we're doing a little bit of light interactivity. There's areas where you get separated. There's areas where you might have to crawl. I think that's another area that our team is really interested in exploring. So, Dark Harbor is a legacy event. This is the 11th season of Dark Harbor, but in many, many ways, this is a year one event for us, meaning that there wasn't a cast list from 2019. This is a new team of people cobbled together from the past, the present, and other events, um, with the common goal of resurrecting this event, that was so legendary.
Yeah, I think the biggest surprise to me, and part of the reason I never really thought about, I knew 13th Floor was establishing there, the whole Shacktoberfest activity. I did not realize that the city owned the name, the Queen Mary's Dark Harbor. I just thought it was another company that produced it and brought it in. That's why when was there for that announcement, I was like, what? What's going on? And then Chris was telling me, he's like, yeah, the city owns that. 13th Floor doesn't even own that name, the Queen Mary's
Nope.
Dark Harbor. So that's really interesting, and it's very cool that the legacy continues in a whole new way. It's a really fantastic event, folks. I suggest you check it out. Also, if you're looking for more Halloween fun every day this month, because I like to inflict self-pain on myself, I am producing a new episode of that Halloween podcast every single day of the month. I'm talking with new special guests. I've had David Desmulchin from Late Night with the Devil, Devin Sawa from Final Destination, Omri Katz from Hocus Pocus, and lots of folks talking about new Halloween movies and holiday specials every single day of the month. So check that out, that Halloween podcast. And with that, I will say thank you so much to Brett and hand it over to Mina.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks,
That
Jeff.
was really, oh, sorry. That was really wonderful. Thank you, Brett, so much. I can't imagine being on a ship. Like you said that you don't sleep there. I can't imagine wanting to sleep where you work. But I think you have some like converts in the chat, at least that I've seen. So thank you. I put in the chat the next session, which is on a Wednesday, Haunted Experiences with Jeff DePaoli with Ed Terabas, right? Is that the co-founder of Erebus Haunted Attraction in Michigan, which will be really interesting. But in the meantime, I expect to hear from you all that you've gone to the haunted, the Queen Mary, and had the pants scared off of you.
And happy Halloween, everybody. I won't see you till after Halloween. So happy Halloween. Brett, thank you so much. Mina, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful night, everybody.
Thanks a lot.